This story is called The Crazy Christmas Angel Mystery. It's from the Cul-de-Sac Kids Collection 1. And it's book 3. Okay, let's get started. It was 5 days before Christmas break. Eric Angel shoved his feet in his snow boots. He peeked out of his bedroom window. A full moon made the snow twinkle. He shivered thinking about his paper routine. Downstairs, Eric stuffed newspaper into his bag. He wrapped his scarf around his neck and zipped up his fleece jacket. Pushing on his earmuffs, Eric stepped out into the cold morning. Then he saw a moving van parked in the front of an empty house next door. Snow was stuck to its huge tires. Eric peeked around the porch. What a giant moving van, he thought. There must be a bunch of kids moving in. Ducking behind the tree in his yard, Eric watched. A man with a long nose and pointy chin shouted orders to the movers. He waved his cane into the cold air, like someone directing the traffic. Eric dashed through the snow. He slid behind a hedge close to the garage. Now he could see better. He watched the man's long cloak billow out like a cape. "Put the boxes in the living room," the man said. His voice sounded gruff and a little scary. Eric glanced at his watch. Plenty of time. 3:30. Plenty of time before school started. The movers carried in a sofa and a chair, beds and lamps and boxes. Eric kept waiting for some other kids to show up. Surely the new neighbors didn't live by himself. Surely he had a family or someone. A gust of wind blew Eric's green scarf across his eyes and pushed it back. The old man paced back and forth, then stopped. He was staring at the hedge. Could he see Eric hiding behind it? Quickly, Eric stuffed his scarf inside his coat. He pushed his newspaper back down. He could feel his heart thumping. The old man shuffled to the edge of the sidewalk. Eric shivered. Then the old man mumbled something, but Eric couldn't understand it. Maybe he was having a bad day. Moving was sometimes like that. Eric remembered the day he moved to Blossom Hill Lane. It was not fun, not until he met the Cul-de-Sac Kids. Now there was no better place on earth. We'll stick together no matter what, Abby Hunter had always said. It was true. From the first time he had met them, the Cul-de-Sac Kids were true friends. Eric decided he would be the one to welcome the new kids, the ones he hoped were moving into the house at the end of Blossom Hill Lane. He would do it even if he had to spy a little first. Chapter 2. Eric watched the old man go inside. He wanted to ask where his family was, but it was time to deliver papers. Eric got up, brushed the snow off his knees. He crossed the street to Stacy Henry's house. A light was on in the kitchen. Stacy's mother was probably getting her crock pot ready. She worked long hours. Eric opened the storm door. He tried not to shake the Christmas wreath. Then he put the newspaper inside. Abby Hunter's house was next, who was dark except for Christmas lights around each window. Red, white, green lights flashed on and off. Next came Duncan's home. His real name was Edward Muffin, but nobody called him that. He was Duncan, the hottest third-grade basketball player around. Eric opened the storm door. He placed the newspaper inside. Then Eric did the same thing at each house. He wanted to keep the papers dry for the customers. Someone was up early in Dee Dee Winters' house. Probably her dad, Mr. Winters, had a long drive to work in the mountains. Eric turned left at the end of the cul-de-sac. He had a bunch more houses to go. The sky was turning grey. She gray, grayish pink. It would soon be dawn. At last, Eric headed home. His mother, hot blueberry oatmeal, was waiting. In the corner of the kitchen, his grandpa's birds chirped their morning song. 3 canaries and a pair of parakeets. Soon Eric heard Abby Hunter's whistle, and the Cul-de-Sac Kids were heading for Blossom Hill School. Eric's mum hugged him, then he pulled on his boots, jacket and scarf again. He dashed out the front door, letting it slam. Across the street, Abby and her new Korean brothers, Sean and Jimmy, packed clumps of snow into balls. Stacy Henry hid behind her snowman. She laughed as a snowball flew at her. Dee Dee Winters was half down the cul-de-sac. Skipping through piles of snow, she strapped on her red backpack. It was probably filled with Christmas cookies for her teacher. Dee Dee was the best first-grade cookie baker everywhere. Carly Hunter, Abby's little sister, followed Dee Dee. They were the best friends. They giggled and kicked the snow in the street. Duncan and Jason Birchall raced and slid. They zoomed up and down Duncan's driveway. After school, they would go skidding down the hill. Mean steep Blossom Hill, 3 blocks away. Eric would go too. Eric hurried to catch up. His pants still stuck to his knees from kneeling in the snow, spying on a neighbor. "Wait!" he called to Duncan and Jason. Abby ran up to him. "What took you so long?" Eric pointed to the house with the moving van. "I wanted to see who was moving in there." Stacy tossed the snowball at Abby. Abby caught it and threw it back. "Were you spying, Eric?" Stacy asked, grinning. "Just welcoming the new neighbors," Eric said, grinning. "There's only one," said Stacy. Eric pulled up his wet jean. "Who says?" "Abby does." "Sure there's no kids?" Eric asked. Stacy nodded. "For now, Sean and Jimmy are the newest kids on the block." She chased Abby's brothers. They were too fast for her. Eric champed through the deepest snow he could find. He grumbled under his breath. "I hope they're not wrong," he whispered. "Who wants to live alone?" Eric felt sorry for the old man. He remembered being with his mother all alone. It was after his father had died in Germany. Then his mother invited Grandpa to live with them. That's when they came to the United States. That was 2 years ago, when Eric was in 1st grade. Eric turned around and looked at the cul-de-sac kids. The cul-de-sac. Just as he did, the man with the pointy chin stood in the window of the house. He was leaning on his cane and seemed to be looking right at Eric. Eric froze in his place. The man was looking at him. Eric shivered. His stomach flip-flopped. Then the curtains closed. Eric turned around. He ran to catch up with his friends, but all he could think of was the man at the end of the cul-de-sac. Why is he alone? Is he as creepy as he looks? The bell rang as Eric started across the schoolyard. "Wait for me," he called. "Hurry up," shouted Duncan. "We'll be late." Eric slid down the sidewalk and dashed into school. Chapter 3. Eric pounced down the hall towards the 3rd grade. He pushed the door open. Mrs. Hershey was waiting on the board. Eric pulled off his boots and hung up his jacket. Then he slid in the seat next to Duncan. He tapped his friend on the shoulder. Duncan turned around. "What?" "There's an old man at the end of the block," he said. "And he's really scary," Eric whispered. Duncan frowned. "There is?" Eric described the old man. Large, dark coat, the cane, his face, and Eric Hagel, Mrs. Hershey said. Eric looked up. "I'm here." Mrs. Hershey was calling roll. Eric would have to tell Duncan the rest of the story at recess. Abby was passing back the spelling test from last week. Eric made 100. Yes! He leapt up to look at Duncan, but Duncan put his hand over the grade at the top of his paper. Too late. Eric had seen it. Don't worry, Eric said. I'll help you drill for the next test. Duncan picked up the eraser on his pencil. Okay, he muttered. Eric looked at the new spelling test. The words were Yule, candlelight, carols, wreath, decoration, tissels, holly, angels, mystery, and candy cane. Mystery? Eric stared at the word. What was it doing on the Christmas spelling list? Squeezing his pencil, Eric tried to write the words in his best printing. It wasn't easy. Eric kept seeing the old man's face. It showed up wherever he wrote the words on his list. It appeared where he wrote his name on the right side. Eric rubbed his eyes. He had to get the man's face out of his mind. He looked at the flag. He counted to 10 under his breath, and he looked at Miss Hershey. Her bright red and green Christmas sweater might help him forget the scary face. Eric, are you alright? Miss Hershey asked. He nodded. Everything would be alright soon, he told himself. After school, Eric went sliding down Blossom Hill with Duncan and Jason. Eric forgot about the scary face. It was almost dark when the boys headed home. Are you still going to help me with my spelling? Duncan asked Eric. Sure am, Eric said. But I have to get home after to do my book report. What's your book report about? Jason asked. It's about a mystery, Eric asked. Sounds good. I like mystery, Jason said. Duncan's sled got stuck in the snow. He pulled hard on the rope. Mysteries are okay, I guess. Jason laughed. The scarier, the better. Don't they give you bad dreams? Asked Duncan. Sometimes, said Jason, but if I pray before I go to bed, it's better. Eric pulled his scarf tighter. Why don't you skip the scary stuff? Duncan said, yeah, I remember what the Bible verse says about thinking on good stuff. The Bible verse says that. Eric says that, and Duncan's smart. I've learned it the first time I went to Abby's church. You should come and see the Christmas program. I'm going to be Joseph this year. Who's Mary? Jason asked. Abby Hunter, said Duncan. His cheeks turned red, but not from the cold. Eric scooped up some snow and licked it. Chapter 4. Eric pulled his sled towards his house. Before going inside, he glanced next door. The moving van was gone. The garage was closed. Everything looked dark, till someone lit a candle in the living room, and another. Soon the room was filled with a glow. What was going on? Didn't the old man have electricity? I saw lights this morning, Eric thought. Leaving his sled on the porch, Eric kicked his boots off. Inside the front door, he smelled German sausages. Eric's mum was setting the dinner room table. Grandpa was talking to his birds. Eric went into the kitchen to wash his hands. They were frosty from sledding. His mother came into the kitchen. I've been thinking about inviting Mr. Tessera for supper sometime. Grandpa turned away from the birdcage. Who? Our new neighbour, Mrs. Hagel said. Very thoughtful, said Grandpa. I'd like to meet the old fellow. Eric dried his hands and hurried to the dinner room. He didn't know what to say. How could he tell his mother? He was scared of Mr. Tessera. Eric's mother brought in steamy sausages and potato sauce mixed with caraway seeds. Eric's grandfather chuckled. I think those birds want a taste of the sausage. Eric pulled his chair out and sat down. Grandpa was bird crazy. Give them some caraway seeds instead, Eric suggested. Before dessert, Eric's mum brought out a handful of candles. She lit them, all of them. The dining room glowed with a magical golden light. Eric stared at the candles. There were 12. They reminded him of the light in Mr. Tesla's living room. Only 12 days till Christmas, Eric's mother said. I hope I finish my shopping this weekend. Eric glanced at the candles in front of his plate. He hadn't even started shopping. Oh, well, there was plenty of time left. He daydreamed about candles. Suddenly, the old man's face popped in. It was the scary face he had seen that morning. Yikes! Eric rubbed his eyes. Are you tired? His mother asked. No, Eric said quickly. He didn't want to be sent off to bed early. That would spoil his plans to spy on the mystery man. Chapter 5. After supper, Eric hurried to Duncan's house. The Christmas spelling list was ready. Eric gave the first word. Spell Yule. Duncan tried and missed. He left the E off the end. I don't get it, he said. Eric held up the dictionary. At last, he said, here it is. It means you will. You will shouldn't be on Christmas spelling list. Not you will. You will. Eric said, Yule is a Christmas word. Here, let me show you. He found the word in the dictionary. Eric let Duncan read the meaning. Yule means Christmas, said Duncan. Eric nodded. It in Germany, where I was born, people used to burn Yule logs at Christmas. It's a giant piece of firewood, sometimes a whole trunk of a tree. Wow, a whole trunk of a tree? Said Duncan. Yup. How did it fit in the fireplace? Asked Duncan. Our fireplaces can't hold a Yule log, but in the olden days they could. Now my mum lights candles instead. Eric looked at the next word on the list. Candlelight. I'll give you a hint, he said. This word is two words put together. It's a compound word. First try. Duncan spelt it right. Eric drilled his friend on the words. When they came to mystery, Eric scratched his hand. I wonder why Miss Hershey put this word on the list. Maybe she knows about the first Christmas, Duncan replied. What do you mean? Eric asked. Well, the first Christmas was the true Christmas. Only God could have set it up. Eric closed the dictionary. Huh? For one thing, Joseph and Mary didn't live in Bethlehem, but God knew way ahead of time that Jesus was going to be born there. Duncan sat down beside Eric on the floor. What else? Eric said. Jesus was God's son, but he was also a man. That's a good mystery for you, said Duncan. Yeah, said Eric. You're right. That's not all, said Duncan. The first Christmas was about presents. The best one of all. The baby boy named Jesus. Sounds like you really had this stuff down, Eric said. I learned it at church, Duncan said. Eric thought about the spelling list. Does Mrs. Hershey go too? He asked. Duncan stood up. I've never seen her there, but I have a feeling she goes to a church somewhere. It was time to leave. Eric had important plans. He headed straight for Mr. Tesla's house. The moon was as big as a basketball. Full moons were like that. Just then, Dee Dee's kitten jumped out of the bushes. Eric stopped. The house cat could freeze to death outside. Eric ran after him. Come here, Master Whiskers. Meow. The cat headed down the sidewalk towards Mr. Tesla's. Leaping over mounds of snow, Mr. Whiskers seemed to know where he was going, straight to the old man's front porch. Eric's heart was pounding hard. Here, kitty, kitty, he called softly. Eric tiptoed through the snow, reaching out for the fluffy grey cat. Then Mr. Whiskers leaped onto the windowsill. Boldly he pranced across. This is horrible, thought Eric. Then he looked up. He could see the old man's shadow in the window. By light of a dozen candles, Mr. Tesla was putting out the Christmas tree. Eric could hardly see through the sheer curtains, but he knew that he could see Mr. Tesla's long nose and pointing chin. Eric shivered in the darkness. The whole thing was creepy. He moved closer to have a better look. The candles flickered in the window. Moon shadows danced on the snow. Then Master Whiskers meowed like a trumpet in the stillness. "Be quiet," Eric shouted. The porch light flashed. Eric spun around and ran for his life. Chapter 6. Eric slammed his front door and he leaned hard against it, gasping for breath. He was safe. "What's the matter?" his mum asked. Eric tossed his jacket onto the hook in the closet. His chest moved up and down. He could hardly talk. "Eric, are you all right?" she said. He waved his hands in front of his face. "It's Master Whiskers. He's out there in the cold somewhere." "That poor little thing." Eric nodded. "He was trying to catch him. I was trying to catch him and to take him home." It was only half the truth. "Well, I think you better bundle up and try again." She pulled his coat down off the hook and held it. Eric didn't say a word. He was too scared to go out there and look for Master Whiskers. Closing the door behind him, Eric stayed on the front porch. He felt safe. He looked at Mr. Tesla's house. The porch light was still on, but Master Whiskers was nowhere. Slowly, Eric creeped into the night. He studied the shadows behind the living room curtains. It looked like Mr. Tesla was decorating his tree. If only he had Grandpa's field glasses. His grandpa only used them for bird watching in spring. Eric wished he had them now. He could hardly stay far enough from the old man's house. Eric went back inside. He asked Grandpa for the field glasses very politely. Why do you want them?" Grandpa asked. "They might help me find Master Whiskers." Eric felt bad about lying to Grandpa. "How can you find a cat in the dark?" his grandfather asked. "Please, just let me have a little try," Eric pleaded. Grandpa pulled himself out of his chair. He muttered something up and went upstairs. Eric was so hoping that his grandfather would do it. When Grandpa came down, Eric saw the field glasses. Yes! Promising to take care of them, Eric dashed outside. Now for a good hiding spot. He looked around the cul-de-sac. His eyes stopped in front of Stacy's house. There stood her fat snowman. It was perfect. He crossed the street and headed for the snowman. Crouching down, Eric headed the glasses. He turned the dial slowly. Mr. Tesla's living room came in view. Candles flickered everywhere through the curtains. Eric saw Mr. Tesla hang a string of Christmas lights. He wondered if the man was smiling. He wished he could see his face. Then Eric remembered the scary face and changed his mind. Mr. Tesla hung up some round ornaments. Lost the Christmas angel. Eric could almost hear Mr. Tesla grunting and groaning as he reached up. Just like Grandpa, the angel came to rest at the top. The old man stepped back for a look. Then the most shocking thing happened. He reached up to touch the angel, and it began to fly around and around the room and glided Eric felt glued to the spot behind the snowman. Reading about stuff like this was one thing, but seeing it? Wait till he told the Cul-de-Sac Kids. He stood up on his toes for a better look. The angel was still doing its thing, drifting through the air around the living room. "What's she doing?" someone asked behind him. Eric jumped a foot high. It was Dee Dee Winters. "You should have never speak up like that behind someone like that," Eric scolded. "Master Whiskers is lost. I know. I helped you in a second." "I'll help you in a second," Eric said. "Here, look through these first." He held up the field glasses for Dee Dee. "See that angel flying around?" Dee Dee was silent as she watched little puffs of air come out of her nose. Finally, she said, "Wow, what's happening over there? Crazy, isn't it?" Eric said. Dee Dee nodded. Her eyes grew even bigger and bigger. "I've never seen a real angel before." "Me either." Dee Dee was shivering hard. "Come on, I'll help you find your cat," Eric said. They crossed the street together. "Meow, meow." Eric stopped. "Did you hear that?" Dee Dee called. "Here, Master Whiskers." More meows. Shaky, shivering meows. They found frosty Master Whiskers under Eric's porch. Dee Dee bent over and picked him up. "Thank you, Eric." "It was nothing," he said. "Hurry home and be careful who you talk to about Mr. Tesla's angel. I'm going to call Carly right away." And she turned around and left. Eric darted into his house. He had to make up some phone calls too. The crazy Christmas angel was stranger than any mystery he had ever read. Chapter 7. Eric called Duncan first. "You'll never believe what I saw tonight," he bragged. Duncan was all ears. He wanted to see for himself. Abby, Jason, and Stacy did too. So Eric had a plan. The Cul-de-Sac Kids would have a meeting tomorrow night behind the snowman in Stacy's yard. Terrific! He zipped off to his room to do his homework. The book report was due tomorrow. He would have to write it fast and get it done. Knock, knock. "Come in," Eric called. It was Grandpa. He was wanting his field glasses. Gulp! Eric scratched his head. He must have left them outside. His face was getting hot. It was his own fault. His and that crazy angel's. "Wait, Grandpa, I'll be right back," Eric said. He flew downstairs, yanked his coat, and ran outside. Eric scrambled across the street to the snowman. He leaned over to look. Nothing. He got on his hands and knees and patted the snowy ground. Nothing. Grandpa's field glasses were gone. Eric felt a lump in his throat, growing bigger. He stood up and leaned against the snowman. He brushed off his jeans. When he looked up, the field glasses were staring at him. Carefully, he picked them off the snowman's shoulder. Eric held them up and looked through them. Phew, they were okay. While he was checking them, something caught his eye. Things were at Mr. Tesla's house. Things were crazier than ever. Eric adjusted the field glasses. Were his eyes playing tricks? Slowly, Eric moved towards Eric's house. He got as close as the hedge as he could. Field glasses did not lie. The angels had multiplied. Dozens were flying around the old man. He was swaying this way and that. Mrs. Tesla was dancing with the angels. It looked like he was having the time of his life. Eric wanted to watch forever. Something deep inside him sprang up. It was a strange feeling that wouldn't go away. He knew he had to meet Mr. Tesla face to face. Eric rushed to the old man's front porch. He shook as he stiffened the field glasses in his pocket. More than anything, he wanted to ring the doorbell, but his fingers wouldn't move. He forced his arm up and, shaking with fear, "Eric!" It was Grandpa's voice. Eric jumped a foot. The second time tonight he leapt over the snowy walkway to his house and held up the field glasses. "Here they are, Grandpa." Eric frowned. "I'm sorry about your glasses," Eric asked. He was sorry about something else too, not getting to meet Mr. Tesla. "Those glasses are expensive," Grandpa said, shaking his finger at Eric. Eric looked at Grandpa's soft blue eyes. "It won't happen again, I promise." "And that's the truth," Grandpa muttered. He climbed the stairs, grunting all the way. "So much for borrowing Grandpa's stuff." Eric dashed upstairs to finish his book report. Then he thought of something. If he hadn't left Grandpa's glasses outside, he might have missed the strange sight next door. The angels had multiplied. Now Eric had a big mystery on his hands, and he didn't know what to do about it. Then he had an idea. It might not solve the mystery, but it would solve a little kindness. Chapter 8. The next morning, Eric trudged through the snow. He headed to Mr. Teresa's house to deliver the newspaper, free of charge. Eric would pay for it for himself out of his earning. Eric tiptoed to the porch. He turned the handle on the storm door and placed the paper in the space between the two doors. Inside, a cockatiel clock sang cockatoo clock sang out the time. Six cockatoo in a row. Eric checked his watch. 6:00, right on the dot. He turned to leave, but the sound of a flute stopped him. It was coming inside from Mr. Teresa's house. Eric froze in his tracks. Mr. Teresa plays the flute? Eric listened. The music was for angels. He chuckled to himself as a silvery sound floated around him. He leaned against the porch rails and felt lucky, the only one to hear the magic. He breathed it in and held it close. Then the music stopped and the front door opened. Eric sprang off the porch and down the street. After the Cul-de-Sac Kids met in Stacy's front yard, as they planned, Abby was president, so she called the meeting to order. That was easy. The only reason for the meeting was to see the angels at Mr. Teresa's house. Duncan set up his telescope. Eric looked first. The angels were flying, all right, and Mr. Teresa was prancing and swaying. Carl and Dee Dee looked through looking through the telescope. Sean and Jimmy were next. Jason couldn't wait for his turn. If there's a man dancing with angels, I've got to see it. He walked across the street for a closer look. Duncan followed. Eric stayed behind with Abby, Stacy, near the snowman. I should invite Mr. Teresa to our Christmas play, Abby said. He could appear to the shepherds and bring his heavenly host. Stacy laughed. Good idea. What makes you think that makes them fly, Eric? Abby asked after her turn. Batteries probably, said Eric, and he didn't really know. Not really. He watched as the angels circled Mr. Teresa's head. Carly said, do batteries ever run down? Sooner or later, Eric said, like he knew. Just then, Duncan and Jason came running. Huddle up, Duncan called. The kids grabbed one another's arm to make a circle. Duncan had made a plan. Let's take a Christmas present to Mr. Teresa. Then we can find out what's going on in there. We've already done some spying. Enough spying, said Abby. Let's sing Christmas carols for him to welcome him into the cul-de-sac. Everyone liked the idea. Everyone but Eric. I sing flat, Eric said. But you could whistle, Abby suggested. Leave it to Abby, thought Eric. Someone will need to introduce us after we sing. The kids looked at Eric. Why me? Eric said. You've got us out here, said Duncan. Yeah, hurry up. It's cold to Dee Dee. Eric didn't want to do the talking. He didn't want to whistle Christmas carols. Besides, what if Mrs. Teresa was really creepy and scared everyone away? What then? Chapter 9. It was too late to go caroling now, Eric said. He was chickening out. Abby stuck up for him. Eric's right. Besides, we need to practice first. How about everyone gives Mr. Teresa a gift? I'll make him a Christmas card, Stacy said. She was good at that, definitely, said Abby. Don't forget the Christmas cookies, Dee Dee piped up. Sean wanted to give something too. I'll teach Mr. Teresa Korean folk tune. Jimmy jumped up and down. I'd sing too. Hey, that's a great idea, said Duncan. What about you? Eric asked him. What will you bring? Duncan laughed. Maybe I could write a poem about angels and mysteries, from the Christmas spelling list. Eric liked that. So did all the others. Jason couldn't stand still. He was like that when his ADD medicine wore off. I could dance with Mr. Teresa's angels, said Jason. He jiggled around the snowman. Dee Dee giggled too. Me too. If we sing carols loudly enough, he might open the door, said Jason. Then we can see those flying Christmas angels of his. Wait a minute, Carly spoke up. I thought we were doing it to be friendly, not to spy. Abby put her hand around her little sister. Carly grinned up at Abby in the moonlight. The moonlight reminded Eric of Mr. Teresa's flute. That was strange. Warm feelings stirred inside him again. Maybe caroling for Mr. Teresa wasn't such a bad idea. Maybe he would give the old man a gift after all. I want to give our new neighbor something he'll never forget, Eric said. What is it? The kids shouted. A friend, Eric said. He was thinking of his grandpa. Now everyone has something to give, said Abby. Meet me tomorrow at school and at Duncan's. After school at Duncan's. The kids scattered and went home. Eric still wasn't sure about those angels. Did they run on batteries? Maybe not. Maybe Mr. Tessera was a true angel keeper. If so, Grandpa might just be the friend for him. Sometimes late at night, Eric could hear Grandpa talking to God. Some people called it praying, but with Grandpa, it was just plain talking. Eric went to his room and put on his pajamas. He thought about Mr. Teresa. How could the old man dance with angels and be still so creepy? Chapter 10. It was December the 15th. After school, the Cul-de-Sac Kids met at Duncan's. They practiced 5 songs in a row. Silent Night, Jingle Bells were good, but Angels We Have Heard on High was the best. Eric whistled, Jason jiggled, and Abby said they did. They sounded double dabble good. The next night, the kids lined up on Mr. Teresa's porch. Candles burnt in the window. No one moved. Eric took a deep breath and pressed the doorbell. When the porch light came on, the kids started singing Joy to the World. Eric whistled along. Slowly the door opened. There stood the old man without a smile. He reached for his cane. Eric froze. Mr. Teresa raised his cane in the air. He's going to chase us away, thought Eric. Instead, the cane began to fly in time to the music. Mr. Teresa kept it through the silent night and Frosty the Snowman. But then Mr. Teresa left. What should they do? Eric started whistling Jingle Bells as loud as he could. The old man came back with his flute. He began to play along, his eyes closed. Eric felt a thump in his throat. The old man wasn't scary, not one bit. At the end, the kids clapped. Mr. Teresa bowed lowly. "Thank you, kindly," he said. "And you, what voices? You sound like angels." Angels? Eric peeked around the corner. He didn't see any angels. Had the batteries run down? Abby pointed to Eric. It was time for him to talk. He introduced Stacy Henry first. Stacy gave Mr. Teresa a glittery gold angel Christmas card. It was made from white construction paper. "Welcome to our cul-de-sac," she said. "Thank you, dear," said Mr. Teresa. Eric pointed to Dee Dee Winters and said her name. She handed him a basket of Christmas cookies. "I hope you like your angel cookies." Carly stood up. "I made them, and I helped sprinkle them." The girls giggled. The old man nodded. "Thank you indeed," Eric said. "Now Sean and Jimmy Hunter will want to teach you a Korean folk song." The boys started to sing. The rest of the kids tried to join in on the chorus. Everyone clapped at the end, even Mr. Teresa. Duncan seemed shy when it came to his turn. "I made up a poem for you." Eric could see the words angels and mystery on the paper. They were spelled right. Good for Duncan. Abby Hunter smiled when Eric introduced her. "I have a gift for you, but you must come to my church on Sabbath, on Christmas Eve to get it. It's the Christmas play. I'm going to be married." Mr. Teresa smiled for the first time. "Why, thank you. It will be a delight." Jason Birchall was next. He couldn't stand still. "Want a fast dance or a slow one?" he said. "As you wish." Jason began to jiggle. He looked like he was making it up as he went. Then Mr. Teresa began to play his flute. It was Jingle Bells with lots of extra noise. Jason's jiggle got better and better. At the end, Mr. Teresa said, "Now I have a surprise for you." Eric peeked into the storm door. Through the storm door, he could see Mr. Angel heading off for the kitchen. But he didn't see any angels. What was going on? Chapter 8. Eric heard a soft cooing sound. Mr. Teresa was coming through the living room. Eric leaned forward to see what was on his shoulder. Eric couldn't help it. He stared. Mr. Teresa stood in the hallway. He was covered with white doves. They were perched on his shoulders and on his head. When he clapped his hands, 3 of them flew away. "So these are the angels," thought Eric. The birds seemed comfortable around the old man. It was like he was their trusted friend. Dee Dee's eyes grew wide. Carly giggled. Abby's jaw dropped 2 feet. Stacy whispered, "Wow!" Duncan strapped his head and stared. Sean and Jimmy watched silently. Jason blinked his eyes faster than ever. Softly, Mr. Teresa began to whistle. The doves cooed along. Eric could see their short legs under their round bodies. What a strange sight! Doves do look like tiny angels, he thought. Eric, all in white, with big wings. Eric could feel good inside. Mr. Teresa wouldn't like anyone he had ever met, except maybe for Grandpa. Grandpa loved birds. That was no secret. And sometimes he did strange things, too, like tramping around in Springfield spying on birds with his field glasses. Mr. Teresa stopped whistling. "Merry Christmas, kids," he said, waving his arms. The doves flew away to the Christmas tree. They perched on the branches, and the kids shouted, "Merry Christmas, Mr. Teresa." The new neighbors wore the widest grin on Blossom Hill Lane. Eric whispered to him, "You whistle good." The old man blinked. "So do you. Do you want to come caroling, whistling with us?" Eric said. Mr. Teresa reached for his cane and for his long brown coat. It looked fine, not creepy. First spot, Eric's house. Eric pressed the door. He stood beside Mr. Teresa. They whistled while the others sang Silent Night. They sounded good. Grandpa came to the door. Eric introduced him to Mr. Teresa. Grandpa gave Eric a big hug. He grabbed his coat and hat. He joined the group as they caroled around the cul-de-sac. Eric was so happy. He stopped whistling and tried to sing. It sounded flat, but it didn't matter. Mr. Teresa would never have to be alone again. The cul-de-sac kids could be the old man's family. Mr. Teresa came danced in the air as the carols went from house to house. Soon they were back at the old man's house. He invited Eric's grandfather inside for coffee. The Cul-de-Sac Kids waved goodbye to them. "Merry Christmas," they shouted. "And a Merry Christmas to you, all of you," Mr. Teresa said, waving his cane. He was out of breath, but a smile burst across his long face. Before the two men reached the porch, Eric was whistling again. It was time for his favorite carol, "Angels We Have Heard on High." Wow, wasn't that such a good story? I hope you can have a good year. Bye.